by our friends at STCU and Well-Dressed Walrus. Now, let's get down to business with Business Talks.
Welcome to Business Talks. I'm Ryan McNeice, and we're here with Rob Curley, editor of the Spokesman-Review. Most recently, worked at the Orange County Register and previously worked at the Las Vegas Sun and Washington Post. He's been at the forefront of digital journalism and has developed award-winning websites at several newspapers across the country. While he was at the Las Vegas Sun, the newspaper won a Pulitzer Prize and a duPont Award for public service journalism. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rob. And although we started off the top of the show talking about some of these accolades, and I could actually go on and on. I'm going to list a couple. Best news site in the nation, best sports site in the nation, 2010 National Headliner Award, Journalistic Innovation. We could go on and on with those accolades, but that's not necessarily how you see yourself and what you're trying to accomplish at the Spokesman. Tell us a little bit about that.
My heroes were old school journalists, and by old school I mean like 1890s. You know,
Right.
I love William Allen White, and when I think about the role of an editor, I envision that, and you know, I love modern day editors and editors like Ben Bradley, but that's not who I ever wanted to be. I always wanted to be more like William Allen White. So I'm kind of old school. I guess the irony is I'm old school, and I kind of known from being digital stuff, but that isn't what I see myself as.
Well,
I see myself more
and I would
as an
agree.
old school.
I think you are known for that. And what do you think has changed from what some of the old school journalists have done to the new breed, if you will? I don't think it's a hidden story that the newspaper industry has been under the gun in the last decade. What do you think has changed?
Yeah, that's a hard answer, because it was literally that there just weren't that many options available to get a wide scope of
Right.
news, and the newspaper provided that. So part of it was the internet, but there were all sorts of other things that made the industry change. You know, the internet starts to really start rolling in 96, 97, 98, and newspapers were doing fine. It was 2007, 2008 when the recession hit. The recession wrecked a lot of things.
Right,
you
and
know?
that's interesting that it isn't necessarily the digital transition, but other factors as well.
People love to argue what it was. My argument it was a recession, and that
Right.
if you look at 70 years worth of circulation data from 1940 to 2010, you see that newspapers across the country were largely flat. Whereas if you look at U.S. household growth, it looks like a hockey stick. So to me, these problems were deep-seated into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and we just didn't know how to grow an audience. And I think it was largely because a lot of editors were very focused on committing acts of journalism to impress other editors and journalists.
Right.
And whereas I don't think the William Allen Whites of the world could care about that. And the irony is, William Allen White was one of the last newspaper editors to be featured on a stamp, and cover of Time magazine. I mean, I guess you could say Marty Barron at the Washington Post is a big deal. I mean, Spotlight really made him very famous, but not like what we saw somebody like William Allen White in the 1920s. I mean, this is a guy who was the editor of a tiny newspaper in Kansas, yet every major presidential candidate took the train to try to get his endorsement. I mean, it was a different era, because he wasn't trying to be something other than what he was, and he was the defender of his hometown. He was the sage of Kansas. He was a plain-spoken guy who mowed his lawn.
So if you take what you've learned and gleaned from these folks in the early days, maybe
Yeah.
in conjunction to pros and cons of what folks have done currently, how do you take that and strategically move the Spokesman forward?
No one knows what the right answer is for newspapers. I mean, I'm a little bit of not a little bit, I'm a huge nerd. So I'm not afraid of spreadsheets. I'm not
Right.
afraid of
Data.
of looking at data points, and I like to look at what the other publicly held media companies are doing, and when you look at that, you can realize that nobody has this figured out.
Right.
So
Trial and error to a certain extent.
So why feel like you got to do it the way they're doing it? If we know it's not working, why not try something else? So my view was very much, I wanted to try to be more like an 1890s, 1910 editor, and they're more involved in the communities. There was a certain pride in journalists for kind of standing above the city and documenting what happens and telling the world that. But that's not what. Ben Franklin was a newspaper publisher.
That's right.
He was trying to change the country. William Ellen White, wasn't trying to change the country, but he was very much building a newspaper that would inform and entertain and enlighten his neighbors. It wasn't like. There are so many people who own newspapers now who live in New York, but their newspapers are all over the country, and somebody in New York doesn't care about what happens to a newspaper in Alabama.
Right.
I like the idea of a local ownership where their phone number's listed.
But I think that's what you've expressed that you were initially compelled by is not only the local content, but from a photojournalism standpoint, Spokesman has historically been award-winning. I think that was enticing to you when you came here.
Yeah, the photography staff was amazing, but the big thing was local ownership. I wanted a newspaper where the people who owned it lived in that town and ate in the same restaurants, and kids went to the same schools. I say this and completely am not joking. People will not get their paper on Sunday and call Stacy Coles at home. I can't
wonder why he's
you.
not calling back.
No, he does. If he doesn't call him back, he's calling circulation saying, "Yeah, I need you to go
Please
deliver
call
the
this
paper."
individual.
I wanted to work at a paper where that was the case, because if it doesn't have local ownership, then there's a whole level of accountability that just goes away, and I wanted that. And there's just a handful of papers like that. Lots of weeklies across the country are owned by local owners, but not very many dailies.
Well, let's talk about that in terms of the difference between a weekly and a daily and how maybe you meld the two.
So I love weekly newspapers. I grew up in a 3-newspaper household. We got a morning paper, and the morning paper was just like the Spokesman-Review. It was the Topeka Capital Journal, and I loved it. The writers that were my heroes. And then in the afternoon, we either got the Ottawa Herald or the Emporia Gazette, basically whichever paper was cheapest. And then on Wednesday, we got the Osage City Free Press, which was our local paper, which would have a half page of who had visited who in the nursing homes. And I love that. I tell people, as somebody who's been around technology for a long time and worked on the internet, that weekly newspapers have the greatest Google-proof technology I've ever seen in my life, and that's that you can go to their front page and Google their lead story, and they're the only newspaper in the world that has that story. I tell people, if we do the Spokesman right, that's what it will be like. It'll be like a weekly newspaper that comes out every day, where you Google our lead story, and we're the only ones who had it, or we had it first.
But I think that is a significant point, and we were chatting before the show that local versus national content, and you specifically have a lot of passion for that front page being local content. Talk about that a little bit.
To me, that's the great differentiator in a world filled with commodity content that's on Facebook and CNN, and
it can be pulled down from multiple sources.
Why do that? I mean, why? So I felt like we needed to have really great national and international coverage, which is hard, by the way, because our country is so polarized right now.
Right.
That,
and information is coming from such a plethora of sources anyway.
But everybody's inclination at newspapers was to cut all of that, and I wanted to actually increase it. I just didn't want it on our front page. So we increased our news hole so we could run more stories and run probably 3 or 4 times as much national news as any other newspaper our size would run. But I don't like it on our front page. And sometimes I get really angry when a story of national significance gets big enough that it's going to bump our local stories off the front, because I don't feel like that's what makes us special. I think what makes us special is our local stories, and I love for the front page to be all local. I mean, when we do it right, to me, the front page is all local. It's why when things happen nationally, I do everything I can to get a hold of our delegation in Washington and try to localize it. So at least if I have to put it on the front page, you at least know what our people think about it.
Clearly, Gonzaga gave us a bit to talk about.
Oh, yeah. So to me, I use things called KPIs, key performance indicators, and a lot of people get freaked out about that because they think, oh, you're looking at web numbers. And, yeah, I am, but I'm looking at research into what our print readers read too. And and as weird as this sounds, Spokane is a big town that's really a small town.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
It's one of the 100 biggest cities in the United States, but it's a small town. So when people are angry, they call me, and I think nothing surprises them more than when I call them back. And
the editor, the spokesman, is calling me back.
And we don't talk for 2 or 3 minutes. It's not. I mean, I'll talk to them for 20 or 30 minutes, and then they'll tell me that I'm not like what they thought, and they are having casserole, and I ask what kind, and they say tuna, and I say, okay, I'll be over at 6.
But that's something worth remarking, because that's not what people do now. Editors don't do that now across the country or across the world, but they did it in the time that you're talking
they
about.
had
that you
to,
respected
because it was
these
their
folks.
neighbors.
That's right. I better call my neighbor back.
So to me, it was acting that way. It didn't. I don't know. I grew up in a small town. I mean, much smaller than Spokane. I just act the way I would act in my hometown, and so that's and I'm unconventional. I like to talk to people. I'm more than a little bit goofy, and I'm not afraid to let my personality.
Unconventional, but I would argue unconventional logically, rationally, for a reason. And I'm fascinated by the aspect that we've discussed in the past about how into data and matrix you are.
Well,
talk about that, where it comes from, how you assimilate the massive amounts of data to make strategic decisions.
Sure. Well, that's what led me to really wanting to cover Gonzaga much differently than before. And it's because there aren't very many things that you can say are a communal experience in a city of, a community of 500,000. But you look at Gonzaga's basketball team, and when they're playing and when they're in season, they unite the community. I mean, even if you don't like basketball, you pay attention because your friends care.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't matter where you, if you live on the hill or if you live in North Spokane or if you live in the valley. I mean, you care. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter where you are on the socioeconomic spectrum. It doesn't matter if you're Catholic, Protestant, or Wiccan.
You can root for the Zags.
You love the Zags. So to me, covering the Zags wasn't. I think people misunderstood why we were doing it at that level. It was because it was a communal experience. And right now we need communal experiences. As polarized as the country is, we need things that unite us, whether we drink beer or drink milk. And so to me, when I looked at the data, that was one of the things that just jumps out at you.
People want to talk about the Zags.
That they care about it. And I love that. So the data that I look at is all over the place. I look at online information, but when I look at online information, I'm not as consumed with page views as most people are. I'm more interested in how big is the local audience locally. I'm really interested in the time spent.
See, that's interesting too, though, because you're digging below the surface. You're not necessarily saying that the likes or that is the end all, but rather, what does this mean? How long did they spend on this? The click-through rate, et cetera.
And more importantly, was it a local audience? I'm not trying to build a website or a newspaper that makes people from New York happy. I mean, to me, if we build the Spokesman right, when your family comes in from Minnesota and they see the paper, they'll hate it because there's nothing about it they can relate to because it's so Spokane.
Which means you were successful.
Yes.
Let's take a short little break and come right back with Rob Curley, editor of the Spokesman-Review. Thank you very much.
My name is Randy James. I'm the founder and director of the Institute of Science and Technology at North Central High School. Kids are far more capable than we ever give them credit. We have $1 million worth of equipment, and we let them use it. And you give them a place to play and do science for real. Instead of having to outsource engineers and scientists and mathematicians, we have kids right here. It takes a whole community to raise children. It really does. STCU invests in the community, and they're a longtime supporter of education. Collectively, we can make a huge difference. I'm Randy James, and STCU is here for good.
Hi, this is Kurt Stockwell with Well Dressed Walrus. We are a local website design and development company here in Spokane. What we do is build beautiful, usable websites for local businesses. A website needs to be beautiful, it needs to be usable for your users, your customers, and yourself. Contact us anytime. We'd love to talk with you about your online marketing.
You're listening to SpokaneTalksOnline.com, Spokane and North Idaho's business and community talk station.
Welcome back to Business Talks. We're here with Rob Curley, editor of the Spokesman-Review. Right before we left for break, we were chatting about data and your fascination with data and how that data and what that data means to you to make strategic decisions for the paper. I know historically you've also had a lot of interaction, I think, with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Tell us a little bit about that scenario and how maybe some of those experiences led to the statistical interest in what you're doing now.
So, well, starting with Zuckerberg, it's not like
or Zuck,
I'm on his Christmas card list. But early on, the pool of people working on the internet was just small, so you ran into people.
Right.
I became friends. I became friends with a lot of people at Google because I would speak at Berkeley. They lived at Berkeley. They would come hear me speak, and then we're doing the same stuff.
But that actually goes to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
That you are getting back to making it local.
Yeah.
And even at the beginning of some of these internet sensations, they were keeping it local too. It just went global.
Look, Facebook is so local. I tell people it's really an email replacement. I mean, if you get hundreds and hundreds of emails a day like I do, you go to Facebook because these are your friends from high school, the ones you went to college with, your neighbor or whatever. In this weird way, it's kind of your tribe of people. So you would never on your computer buy a car and then take a picture of it and then hit send to all. I mean, everybody on your email list would be infuriated. But the second you do that on Facebook, everyone's like, I was looking at that car, but I was thinking, I love that idea.
There's a tribe, if you will.
Yeah, but that's also horrifying to me because it means that you're in this echo chamber now. So you only hear what your friends think. And I think now more than ever, we need to be listening to all sides. So I feel like some of our polarization, believe it or not, is because of Facebook.
Right. It's ironic.
You get you've pre-selected what voices you want to hear. So anyway, back to
here. I mean, on a regular basis, coming through these news feeds.
And the first time someone in your group posts something that the rest of the group doesn't like, they do everything they can to shame them and make them never do that
Block
again.
them, etc.
So.
But I think that's a good analogy too to global or national, international news sources, because people do the same things.
Right.
Those news sources are coming through your feeds, and if it's not necessarily speaking to your flavor of politics, et cetera, people are blocking that news source and only letting in another. How do you combat that in terms of trying to feel like you get both sides of the story of the spokesman?
It's hard.
I think it would be hard.
When I got here, I kind of understood the community a little bit, not the way somebody who's lived here forever would, but the way somebody who looks at stats would. And I understood that to the vast majority of people here, religion still means something. So, on Christmas, we wrote about the birth of Christ. On Easter, our lead story was, a message from a pastor on the resurrection.
Right.
I mean, that's a different take of a newspaper just from there.
Versus New York City.
Yes. So I don't want to build a New York paper. I want to build a Spokane newspaper. But sometimes people will say, that's not how we feel here. And I do, because I look at numbers, I'm not very good at saying, no, 62% of you did feel that way.
You may be trying to advocate for that position, but statistics are telling me otherwise.
Right, and then not just statistics, like voter rolls. I mean, this issue passed by this amount of people. So I don't know how to deal with that sometimes, because sometimes people will be very angry with me. One of the things that we've done is the Coles family brought in a really amazing circulation director. Now that's like the least sexy position at a newspaper, right? But no one realized how important they are. And they brought in a great one. And once you start to have an editor who's kind of building something that's really marketable, interesting things happen. I mean, you go from the early summer to, right before Christmas, our Sunday numbers went from the high 60,000s to 82,000. Now, a lot of newspapers saw a big jump in the new year because they were marketing to people who were upset about what was happening in the White House. Well, we never did. We were just building a different sort of newspaper. Our circulation director was good at dealing with it, and our numbers went up dramatically. So,
without pandering to the political fodder.
It wasn't. I tell people all the time, I don't have an R behind my name. I don't have a D behind my name. I have an S behind my name. I'm Rob Curley of the Spokane tribe.
Right.
Well, that's not really true. I'm not really with the Spokane tribe. Well, you know what I'm saying.
But you're interested in what the Spokane tribe is interested in,
to me,
and is looking at statistically.
I want I want it to feel like it's us.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, if someone thought you were so far right or so far left, that would be difficult from a perception standpoint, probably.
I speak in the public a lot, and if I know I'm speaking to a crowd that can be fairly conservative, the front pages I show all the things that I just said, so I can say, look, I don't think we're what you think we are.
Right. You're backing it up.
Yeah. And so, but to be honest, I would just assume there not be any national news on our front page ever, because I want it to be local.
Seth Godin, I think, made the comment at one time, own your own zip code. And that keeps running through my head as you speak to the local, that you said, I don't need to sell papers in New York.
Right.
Interestingly, marketers oftentimes, even in smaller regions or a little big city like Spokane, they still feel it necessary to try to sell in the big city. But those folks aren't buying the newspapers. So I find that interesting.
But,
own your own zip code.
And that's what we want to be, And the thing is, look, we're human. We make mistakes all the time. I mean, I make more mistakes before noon than most people make all week. Fess up to it, you know. And I like it when we make a mistake and we run an error on page 2. Now, let me rephrase it. I don't like it.
Yeah.
It shows people that we fess up to our mistakes.
But laws of probability, obviously, we all are going to make mistakes. But you own it and move forward.
And I love it when people call and they are angry at something, and I say, you know what, I'm not going to lie, I messed that one up. Yeah. I wish I had a do-over. If it makes you feel better, I'm going to put out another paper tomorrow, and I won't make the same mistake tomorrow.
I'm going to do this again and again and again.
So,
and make improvements.
But when people call and upset about some things and say, well, my neighbors aren't reading anymore and I've quit, well, it's just mathematically not true. We went from 68 to 82. It is what it is.
Yeah, the statistical numbers are showing the readership is going up.
Yeah.
And those numbers are showing an upward trend. Where do you see the newspaper, I shouldn't say the newspaper industry, where do you see the Spokesman going in the next, let's not even get out there 10 years, where do you see it going in the next 2 to 5 years? If maybe just consistently doing what you're doing.
So to me, we have to build something that is medium agnostic, meaning look, here's what's fascinating. When I first get in,
phrase.
When I first got into the internet at a high level, when I was at the Washington Post, I remember having an argument with another editor who said, this story needs to be told this way in mobile, and it needs to be told this way online, it needs to be told this way in print. And
same story.
And I couldn't understand what he was saying, because great content, great stories work on all platforms. I mean, if your favorite song is Stone in Love by Journey,
right,
it sounds just as great on your phone as it does in your car, as it does in your stereo. If your favorite movie is Field of Dreams, you have a 72-inch TV in your living room, but you're watching it on Netflix in your bedroom,
The content either is or isn't.
It's either good or it's not good. It has nothing to do with the platform. So for me, it's like, we got to get the content right, and then we'll make it work anywhere. I mean, if you want it in paper, I'll deliver it to you. If you want it on your phone, it'll be there. If you want
make it accessible,
wherever you need us to serve you, we'll be there. So to me, it's media agnostic. It can work anywhere if we do it right.
No, I like that phrasing, and that phrasing makes a lot of psychological sense. Because, I mean, again, this would be in the statistic field, but what are the percentages on a pie chart, or how many folks are looking for this content in print, online, on television, et cetera? How does that break down? And and trying to figure out how to deliver that content to them. That sounds like that's the goal.
That is. So to me, it's just building content that will work any way people want it. And then in the next 5-10 years, newspapers are not trying to fix that problem. They're trying to fix how do we deliver, and they should be fixing, no, what are you delivering?
Because there should always be content. There's always going to be news. There's always going to be a story that should be told. But figuring out how to tell it right, tell it local, and get it in the channel for people, and how they want to take that information in. What's a day in the life look like for Rob Curley as editor of the Spokesman-Review?
So, unlike most editors, I'm much more of a night person. So most editors kind of come in the morning and leave at 5, 6, 7. I'm much more likely to come in at noon and leave at 8, 9, 10, 11.
It makes some sense. Quiet.
I'm a night owl. So and to me, newsrooms are cool, but we should be honest. Presses are way cool. And it's way cooler to see this thing that you've built come off the presses and hold it and touch it. And I'm not the oldest guy on the planet, but I've been in this industry since the mid-'90s, and nothing gets me more excited than that. I mean, I love that. And
literally having it come off the press.
Yeah. So people always think, well, you're this tech guy. Well, I might be, but let's go look at the presses.
Yeah.
Have you seen how big they are? Have you seen how loud they are?
Which Ben Franklin would have potentially said that too.
I love that. I mean, look, and there's something magical about the print edition, and I'm not going to talk about touching it or holding it or anything like that. What's magical to me about the print edition is on this, I have an infinite amount of space. I can run as many stories as I would like. Here, we had to say, these are the ones we're going with.
It's really editorial by nature. You had to edit it down to a content you thought made sense.
I've always thought it's more interesting what you decide to leave out than what you decided to run, because here you have to make those. It's why I still see kids who, they've never held a newspaper until they're in it, and then they're like, whoa, this is something, and that's interesting to me, because newspapers could have controlled this. Because think about when we were younger, we were in the paper when we were 8, and our mom cut it out and she put it on the fridge, and every time we went to go get a popsicle, we saw it. It was a whole generation who's never experienced what it's like to see themselves in the newspaper, and it sounds weird, but some of the habits that we develop, whether it's the sort of music we like or anything, you start young, you learn how to do it young, and for generations, it was going through the refrigerator and seeing that they got second in the state bowling tournament, and it was in the paper.
And it's clipped out, and it's on the magnet.
It's just been taken away. So now it's fascinating to me to watch a whole other generation see this for the first time and go, wow, this is something.
This is something.
So to me, I'm not betting my career that we can fix this, or that I can sell enough ads to pay for this newsroom. No, I think it's a panorama of content. It's going to be everywhere. So you just, instead of trying to do it 3 or 4 different times, let's just agree that we're going to try to do the right content and make it work everywhere.
That's right.
So that's kind of the goal.
I'm fascinated, and it's what we've tried to do with Business Talks, is delve into the psychology of business. And we can chat Econ 101 all day long, but I think you've done a great job expressing how the different elements of psychology and data and technology converge, and at the end of the day, it comes down to content, the stories to be told. We appreciate you being here on Business Talks. Please come in again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. Appreciate it.
Business Talks is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Ask a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksOnline.com. Business Talks is brought to you by our friends at STCU and Well Dressed Walrus. Business Talks wishes you good business and a good day.
Hi, this is Kurt Stockwell with Well Dressed Walrus. We are a local website design and development company here in Spokane. What we do is build beautiful, usable websites for local businesses. A website needs to be beautiful, it needs to be usable for your users, your customers, and yourself. Contact us anytime. We'd love to talk with you about your online marketing.